In our first look at the 2026 Senate election, what's at stake? Let's find out. Hi guys, welcome to Politics Enhanced. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video and Happy New Year to everybody watching this video. And today we're going to take our very first look over at the 2026 Senate election. It's hard to believe we're just getting out of 2024 and we're already moving on to 2026. It's going to come here sooner than you think, but this is a bit early, but we're just going to go through the states and take a look and see what exactly is at stake for the Republicans, and more specifically, how favorable is the environment for Republicans moving ahead. So without further ado, we're going to fill in the safe Republican states. We have Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, the Dakotas, the Plains states, Texas. Yes, John Cornyn would win by probably 10% or more. We learned that after 2024 in Texas. The polling there is bad. South Carolina would be safe. Florida would be safe. I do think it's possible that Matt Gaetz could be appointed as the next senator replacing Marco Rubio, but we're just going to have to wait and see what Ron DeSantis does down in the state of Florida. You have Iowa, which would be safe Republican, and I'm also going to say Ohio, even though we don't know who the Republican nominee will be. I would assume that whoever replaces J.D. Vance will probably win by 10 points or more because Ohio has become a very Republican-friendly state. However, it's important to note that we don't know what the wave will be. We don't know how the electorate will feel going into the 2026 midterms, so that's also important to note. And of course, we can't forget the great state of Alaska. So already coming out the gate, Republicans would have 51 Senate seats, and now let's do the Democrats. So Oregon, Colorado, Illinois, most of the East Coast, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey with Cory Booker, Delaware would be safe for the Democrats no matter what. So Democrats would have 42 safe seats and Republicans would have 51 safe seats. And of course, this is assuming that it's a moderate environment, and we could even argue that it's a D+2 environment just to be on the safe side, because typically in midterms, the party in power usually loses seats. So looking at the map, we have a few states that will be under 10 points. And I first wanted to talk about the state of New Mexico because the senator who's running there won in 2020, but he barely won by only about 6 points against Mark Ronchetti, who was a Republican, meteorologist, and someone who's favored in the state of New Mexico. Now, I'm not saying that this seat will necessarily flip to the Republicans, but I do think it's important to note that it has potential to get closer, especially after 2024. We see the state shifting more Republican. It could be a fluke or it could be a trend. It's a bit too early to tell, but I do think that New Mexico would probably be likely, maybe lean if it was a really good night for Republicans, but again, it's way too early to tell. Next, we're going to go up north to Minnesota, which is a very elastic state. However, it always seems to vote Democrat, and we know last time around the senator up there won by a safe margin, so I think that for sure it would be a likely to safe margin, probably by 8 to 10 points, but we're just going to have to wait and see what the environment looks like. And in my opinion, that now leaves us with the closest 5 states, which would be Michigan, Maine, Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia. And I first want to talk about the state of Michigan because I do think that Michigan has the potential to be very competitive in 2026. And the reason why I say this, folks, is if you look at the 2020 Senate election in Michigan, Gary Peters barely won against John James. And this was in 2020. There was COVID. It was a blue wave year. I get all that. But still, look at the margin. Peters only won by 1.7% over John James. Now, I'm not saying that it's likely that the Republicans would flip it. We also see in Michigan in 2024 that the Republicans barely lost in the state of Michigan. You do have a party competency problem there. And given that Trump is going to be in the White House and typically the incumbent party usually does lose seats, this Senate seat would probably go for the Democrats, but it might be tilt in this scenario if it's a D+2 night nationwide. Moving up to Maine at large, we have Susan Collins running for re-election. And last time around, Susan Collins won by over 8%. That was in a blue wave year in a state that Biden won by a comfortable margin. So I would say that Susan Collins would probably win Maine by a likely to safe margin, probably 6 to 8 points. It depends on her popularity because Maine is another elastic state that can vote Republican down ballot, surprisingly. So we might get Susan Collins for another term out of the state of Maine. So that gives Republicans 52 and Democrats 45. Now, if we go down south to Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia, these 3 states, in my opinion, will be make or break for the Republicans or Democrats. And the reason why I say this is typically Virginia isn't a swing state. It was closer in 2024. That could have been a fluke or that could be a trend. Again, the results are still so fresh. We're still analyzing them. However, I will say back in 2020, Mark Warner, he won by 13 points. However, there's a caveat to this. Glenn Youngkin's term ends in 2025, and people are saying that there's a chance he could run for the Senate seat in the state of Virginia. And typically when you have governors run for Senate seats, it typically doesn't really move the needle too much. We saw that in Maryland with Larry Hogan. So I don't know if Glenn Youngkin could go out there and flip the Senate seat Republican. It would take a lot of resources, and it would have to be a really good night for Republicans to do that. But I do see Virginia being a little bit closer than usual. Certainly, I don't think it would be a safe state, but I do think that it would be closer than usual. Probably lean to likely, I would say probably a 6-point win for the Democrats. So now if we go down south to North Carolina and Georgia, these two states are really crucial. And North Carolina is a state that Republicans should focus on. Yes, it voted for Trump, but in the Senate elections, at least in the past two, Thom Tillis has barely won. He barely won by 2%, less than 2% actually, back in 2020. And if we go back to 2014, which was a red wave year, we see that Tillis only won by about 1.5%. So with this in mind, and with the fact that it's a D+2 year, I do see Tillis barely winning, but that is going to be a seat that Republicans are really going to have to put resources in. And hopefully the new Senate Majority Leader will be smarter than Mitch McConnell, and he'll put money and resources where they belong. He won't squander money where it doesn't belong. And lastly, that leaves us with the state of Georgia, because Georgia is the swing state of swing states in the Senate election. It's been a purple state for some time now, and as we've seen, Georgia has been the center of American politics in terms of being a swing state. So with regards to Georgia, we have to take a look at the 2020 and 2021 Senate election in Georgia, because Jon Ossoff barely won. He only won by roughly 1.2%, or just a few thousand votes, roughly 55,000 to be exact. So that was a blue wave year. Biden won by 4.5. It did trickle down and carry Jon Ossoff over the finish line, but Republicans are going to have to run a decent candidate, not someone like David Perdue, Kelly Loeffler, or Herschel Walker. It's going to have to be somebody who appeals to the moderates, somebody like a Glenn Youngkin, in my opinion, if Republicans want to flip the seats in Georgia. But this is a true toss-up. I really don't know which way this could go, but since we're so far out, I'm just going to say that it would go Republicans. So currently, Republicans have the ability to win 54 Senate seats realistically without being too hopeful. So thank you all for listening to our very first Senate prediction in 2025. I hope you all have a great day, and stay tuned for more updates. Until next time, Politics Enhanced out.